The first time I watched a diver vanish beneath the pipelines, I swore I'd never take this job again. The ocean was calm that morning, but I remember the way the water shimmered unnaturally, as if something massive was pressing against the surface from below. That's when the supervisor handed me the laminated card, the one with 11 rules written in faded red ink, and told me survival depended on memorizing every word. I remember the first time I broke one of them, and how quickly the sea punished me. I can't tell you all the rules now, but I can tell you how the first one almost cost me my life. I didn't think much of it when they first told me, because the lights strung along the descent line looked solid and steady. They were bright halogens encased in thick glass, swaying slightly as the current pushed against the tether, but the laminated card was clear. Rule 1. Never descend before checking the lights twice. I figured it was a safety precaution, something about equipment reliability, until the first day I actually ignored it. The dive platform creaked under my boots as I adjusted my tank and mask, my partner Mason giving me a lazy thumbs up. He had been at this longer than me, and he liked to joke that most of the rules were just meant to scare rookies. "It's the ocean, not a haunted house," he laughed, tapping the metal railing with his gloved hand. I almost laughed too, but something about the water below made my throat tighten. The surface shimmered strangely, as if the reflection of the sun broke into too many pieces. We descended slowly, hand over hand on the line, bubbles rising around us in steady columns. The halogen lamps glowed a soft greenish white, guiding us downward past the rust-streaked pipes that threaded into the blackness. Mason moved quickly, kicking down toward the first junction, but I hesitated. I hadn't double-checked the lights, not properly, and though every bulb appeared steady, I realized I had only given them a passing glance. My chest tightened when I thought about the words on the card, the simple warning I had already broken without meaning to. By the time I caught up, Mason was already unclipping a repair kit from his belt, motioning at the corroded section of pipe. The water pressed heavy all around us, a crushing silence broken only by the rasp of our regulators. As I leaned closer, my hand brushed against the cold steel, and something flickered in my peripheral vision. A light dimmer than the rest seemed to pulse faintly in the distance. At first, I thought it was just a trick of my eyes, but then I noticed Mason freeze, his hand hovering inches above the pipe. He turned his helmet toward me, and though I couldn't see his face clearly through the mask, I knew he was staring at the same thing. Another light had appeared, farther down the line, swaying gently as if tethered. The problem was, I knew there hadn't been a bulb installed there, not on the schematic we had studied during briefing. Mason's grip on the line tightened, his knuckles whitening inside the glove, and I felt a chill crawl beneath my wetsuit. We were far deeper than I realized, and the water around that extra glow seemed darker than the rest. When Mason kicked toward it, I felt my gut clench. I tried to grab his arm, but he twisted free, determined to see what it was. The halogen bulbs around us flickered in unison, a faint ripple of light running along the cable, as though something had brushed against them. I remembered the supervisor's warning, his stern look as he pressed the rule card into my hand, and suddenly the meaning of never descending before checking the lights twice made horrifying sense. There was something down here that could mimic them, something that wanted us to follow. I held position, forcing myself not to move, even as Mason drifted closer to the false light. My pulse hammered in my ears, my body screaming at me to swim after him, to drag him back. But then the glow dimmed and shifted, like it was breathing. Mason slowed, his head tilting as though he was hearing something I couldn't. Then he disappeared from sight, swallowed in the darkness beyond the last real lamp. The tether line went slack in my hand, and all I could do was stare into the void, waiting for him to return, praying he still would. That's when I felt the tug, not from Mason, but from the line itself. It pulled gently at first, like the current was shifting, but then stronger, deliberate, as though something on the other end wanted me to let go. My grip tightened, bubbles rushing out of my mask, as I fought the instinct to panic. I knew I had already broken the first rule, and now the ocean was punishing me for it. Above, the line of real lights flickered again, one after another, until only the final lamp remained steady in the abyss. And then just beyond it, Mason's light blinked once before vanishing completely. When Mason's light blinked out in the black water, I froze, my lungs burning from the shallow panic breathing I hadn't realized I was doing. The supervisor's voice replayed in my head. The warning that Rule 2, never ignore movement in the pipes, was more important than most divers wanted to believe. At first, I thought the tug on the line had been Mason, but the deeper I stared, the more I understood there was something else out there. The silence was suffocating, but it was broken by a faint vibration that trembled through the metal under my palm. I clung to the descent line, glancing back up, the glowing bulbs swaying in the current. Every instinct screamed at me to ascend, but Mason was still down there somewhere, and leaving him behind wasn't an option. I let go of the tether and drifted toward the pipe, pressing my glove against the cold steel. The vibration came again, stronger this time, like something rushing through the hollow chamber beneath me. The supervisors had said the pipes only carried oil and seawater, but the pulse that throbbed through the metal felt alive, almost like a heartbeat. My regulator hissed as I steadied my breathing, scanning the shadows around the line. The faint glow of the halogens seemed to shrink, swallowed by the oppressive blackness closing in. A distorted clang rattled the pipe, echoing so strangely that it was impossible to tell where it originated. I jerked back, every muscle in my body taut. I wanted to believe it was just pressure shifting inside the sealed system, but the sound had a rhythm, too deliberate to be mechanical. Something was moving inside the network, and I finally understood why the supervisors called it a rule instead of just a precaution. The water seemed heavier now, pressing on me with invisible hands. I tightened my grip on the tool rig at my waist, unclipping a wrench just to have something solid in my hand. Another pulse traveled through the pipe, this one accompanied by a hollow thud that reverberated against my chest. The vibration crawled into my bones, and for a moment, I thought I could hear something beneath the sound, like muffled whispers carried along the length of the metal. The pressure in my ears spiked, and I almost tore out my mouthpiece before realizing the voices weren't in my head, they were in the pipes. I twisted my body, trying to catch any sign of Mason's light, but there was nothing. The only illumination came from the row of bulbs overhead, flickering faintly, as if threatened by an unseen current. I pressed my ear closer to the pipe, my helmet's glass clinking against the steel. The whispers sharpened, shaping into syllables I couldn't quite understand. My pulse quickened, my hands trembling around the wrench. Then all at once, the vibration stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, a void so complete that I wanted to scream just to fill it. Before I could move, the pipe shuddered violently, a deep metallic groan rattling through the framework beneath me. A rush of bubbles escaped my mask as I kicked backward, eyes wide. The section of pipe I had been clinging to bulged slightly, like something inside was pressing outward. My heart slammed in my chest as I realized the implication. Whatever was moving inside wasn't liquid or gas. The bulge traveled along the length of the pipe, swelling and receding like a shadowed form crawling within. It moved too quickly, darting from joint to joint, never lingering long enough for me to see it clearly. I wanted to retreat, to push upward toward the safety of the lights, but then I remembered Mason. What if whatever was inside had gotten to him? What if the pipes weren't just carrying oil anymore, but something that fed on the men who ignored the warnings? My supervisor's words echoed in my mind. Never ignore movement in the pipes. If you do, it'll come out where you least expect. The thought made me grip the wrench tighter, forcing myself to stay rooted instead of fleeing blindly upward. The bulge stopped at a nearby junction, the steel vibrating in tiny pulses. I drifted closer despite my better judgment, the glow of my helmet lamp cutting through the haze. For a fraction of a second, I saw something press against the interior, a face stretched unnaturally thin against the metal. Its mouth gaped open, as if screaming silently, before it was dragged further along the conduit. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat as I recoiled. The face had been human, but distorted, like someone pressed flat into a pane of glass. Mason's face, or someone else entirely. The vibration intensified, rattling through every bolt and bracket holding the pipe in place. My vision blurred as panic clawed up my spine. I kicked backward, putting distance between myself and the junction, but the bulge followed, racing along the length of pipe directly toward me. The glow of my helmet lamp caught it as it rushed closer, a slick, shapeless form pressing outward from the steel like water, trying to escape its container. The face appeared again, but this time there were two, then three, overlapping one another in a grotesque parade. Their eyes rolled and mouths stretched wide, and though no sound escaped, I could feel the vibration humming through the water around me. I shot upward toward the descent line, hauling myself hand over hand. The bulbs flickered violently, as though whatever was inside the pipes was close enough to interfere with their power. My breath came in ragged bursts, fogging the edges of my mask. Halfway up, I dared a glance back, and that was when I saw it. The pipe below me convulsed, metal bending outward like soft clay. Something inside was pushing, forcing its way through. A crack split the steel, thin but jagged, and a burst of oily darkness leaked into the water. I froze, torn between climbing faster and watching the impossible unfold. The crack widened, stretching several feet along the pipe's side. From within, a mass of shifting shadows pressed against the opening, slick tendrils wrapping around the steel, as though testing their newfound freedom. The human faces swirled within the darkness, rising and sinking like drowning bodies caught in tar. One face in particular turned upward, eyes rolling until they locked with mine. My stomach dropped. It was Mason. His features warped and stretched, mouth moving soundlessly, before vanishing back into the black. I nearly dropped the wrench as a surge of horror coursed through me. If Mason was inside, that meant he hadn't simply vanished into the ocean. He had been taken by whatever used the pipes as veins. The mass writhed and expanded, and suddenly the entire junction below me shuddered violently. The lights above me flickered out one by one, swallowed by the dark. I pulled myself up the line, each motion frantic, the water around me vibrating like the heartbeat of something massive and alive. Just as I reached the last glowing bulb, the pipe behind me split wide open with a deafening groan, releasing a surge of black fluid into the sea. The mass within uncoiled, twisting toward me like smoke underwater. I lunged upward, clinging desperately to the line, but the tendrils stretched farther, faster than I could move. My helmet lamp caught their slick forms as they reached, curling toward my leg. The wrench slipped from my hand, tumbling into the abyss below, and in that moment I knew Mason wasn't gone. He was part of whatever had taken him. And now it wanted me too. The tendrils lashed toward my leg, and instinctively, I yanked myself higher up the descent rope, but the line jerked violently beneath me. That was when I remembered Rule 3. Always cut your line if it pulls back. The one rule every diver swore they'd never need until it was too late. At first, I thought the pipe's rupture had just created a suction, but then the rope twisted in my hand, tugging with a force that felt intentional. Something wasn't just holding the line, it was pulling me back down. I gritted my teeth, trying to steady my breathing as the regulator hissed in my ears. My other hand scrambled for the cutting tool strapped to my thigh, but hesitation froze me. The line was my lifeline, the only thing tethering me to the rig above. If I cut it, I'd be adrift in the black with nothing but a failing set of bulbs. But as the rope jerked again, harder this time, I knew I didn't have the luxury of indecision. The pull wasn't mechanical, it was deliberate, like a fisherman reeling in a catch. I sliced the blade through the thick cord, the fibers snapping apart with a sudden pop that echoed in my helmet. The tension released instantly, the rope whipping away into the dark like it had been snatched by an unseen hand. My chest heaved, adrenaline coursing through me, but the relief was short-lived. Without the line, I was untethered, the weight of the sea pressing down from every direction. The tendrils still writhed in the water below, searching, but they no longer had a direct path to drag me down. That didn't mean I was safe. The bulbs above flickered again, and I swam upward, kicking hard. My helmet lamp cut through only a few feet of water before fading into shadow. Behind me, the pipe continued to groan and split, the sound reverberating like an animal tearing through its cage. My thoughts spiraled. If Mason had been pulled into the pipes through his line, how many others had been taken the same way? And worse, if I hadn't cut mine, would I be plastered inside that metal casing right now, my face stretched flat against the steel? The water around me stirred unnaturally, as though currents were forming where none should exist. A low hum rattled through the framework above, and I realized the entire network of pipes was vibrating now, not just the one I'd seen rupture. Whatever was inside wasn't contained anymore. It was moving through the veins of the structure like blood through an artery. I forced myself higher, trying to keep the rig lights in sight, but every time I gained a few feet, the sea seemed to press harder against me, dragging me down like invisible hands. The knife in my hand was slick, almost slipping from my grasp as I adjusted my grip. I kept glancing at the rope stub dangling from my harness, its frayed end drifting like a severed limb. A part of me still wanted to grab it, to tie myself back into the safety of the system, but the rule echoed in my head. Always cut your line if it pulls back. There was no going back now. A dark shape moved below me, too vast to make out clearly, and for a moment I swore the entire sea floor shifted, as though something massive had rolled over in its sleep. A voice crackled faintly through my comms, distorted by static. Rig diver report. Status. Relief surged, but I bit it back before answering. What if it wasn't them? What if the voices I'd heard through the pipes had found another way into my comm system? I'm here, I managed, my voice shaking. Lines cut. Mason's gone. The pipes. They're not just pipes. There was silence. Then another burst of static. This time the voice was clearer, and it wasn't one I recognized. It was whispering my name. My throat tightened, and I slammed the comms off, unwilling to let whatever was on the other end keep speaking. The sea was alive with vibration now, each pulse pressing against my chest like a second heartbeat. I kicked harder, ignoring the burning in my legs. Above me, the last functional bulb buzzed, its glow dimming as though the darkness itself was consuming it. If I didn't reach it soon, I'd be swallowed whole. My fingers brushed against the light frame, just as it went dark, plunging me into total blackness. I froze, disoriented, my helmet lamp suddenly feeling pitiful against the void. Something brushed past my arm, slick, cold, and strong enough to push me sideways through the water. I swung the knife wildly, connecting with nothing but resistance, like slicing through smoke. The whispers returned, not through the comms this time, but directly through the water, reverberating inside my helmet. They weren't words at first, just a rhythm, but then syllables began to form. Cut, cut, cut. The repetition was mocking, as if the rule itself had come alive to torment me. I forced myself upward again, hand over hand on the light frame, until I reached the support beam above. My chest screamed for air, though the regulators still fed me oxygen. My mind kept replaying the sight of Mason's face pressed inside the pipe, his mouth moving in silent warning. Had he tried to follow Rule 3 too late, or had cutting the line only delayed the inevitable? The questions gnawed at me, but I shoved them down, clinging to the structure like a lifeline. Then I felt it, the unmistakable pressure of something pulling at my harness again. My stomach flipped. I'd cut the line, but something had found another way to grip me. I twisted, knife ready, but the darkness below offered no shape, no form, just an endless void stretching down. The pull grew stronger, dragging at my weight belt and threatening to peel me off the beam. I hacked at the straps, severing the belt and letting it tumble into the deep. The pull vanished instantly, like a predator releasing prey it no longer wanted. For a moment, I floated in stillness, my body trembling from exertion. The silence returned, broken only by the faint hiss of my regulator. I thought I'd finally escaped whatever was clawing for me below, but then the beam beneath my hand shuddered violently. A hollow clang traveled through the structure, and I realized too late that the vibration was moving upward this time. racing through the framework I was clinging to. Something was climbing, using the rig's skeleton the same way I was, and it was coming fast. The beam beneath me rattled as the vibration surged upward, and that was when I remembered Rule 4. If something follows you up, never look down. My first instinct was to glance at the black abyss below, but the rule clawed its way into my head, louder than instinct itself. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced my body higher, hands scraping against the corroded metal, because whatever was climbing toward me, seeing it would be worse than not knowing. The supervisors hadn't explained why, only that those who broke the rule never made it back. My gloves slipped on the slimy frame, but I caught myself, heart pounding as the rig groaned under the strain of something unseen. The sound was different from the shifting pipes. This was the structure itself protesting, each bolt squealing as though immense weight pressed against it. I climbed faster, my chest heaving, air rattling in and out of the regulator in desperate bursts. The urge to look down was unbearable, like gravity had shifted from beneath me, drawing my gaze toward whatever stalked the shadows below. I clenched my jaw so hard, my teeth ached, muttering under my breath, just to drown out the thought. The whispers started again, faint at first, bleeding into the regulator hiss. Look down, look. The words swam inside my helmet, coaxing, taunting, daring me to disobey. My nails dug into the seams of my gloves, and I forced myself to hum instead, a nonsense tune I didn't recognize. But that filled the silence just enough to keep my focus upward. The hum cracked into a laugh, though the sound was anything but sane. I wanted to scream, but screaming meant opening my mouth, and opening my mouth meant letting something in. The vibration intensified, a steady rhythm, like footsteps climbing rung after rung of an invisible ladder. Each pulse rattled my chest and echoed through my bones, and I couldn't tell if it was outside or inside me anymore. My legs kicked in panic, but the weight of the water made every motion sluggish, like running in a nightmare. My lamp beam caught glimpses of the rig, twisted pipes and beams stretching upward like a skeletal tower, but I refused to angle it downward. Every nerve screamed that something was just beneath my feet, reaching, waiting for the single mistake of curiosity. Halfway to the surface, the comms hissed alive again. "Don't look down," the voice whispered. So faint I thought it might have come from inside my skull. It wasn't the supervisor. It wasn't Mason. It wasn't anyone I knew. My breath caught, and for a split second, I nearly glanced below, just to confirm the source. But my grip tightened, and I bit my lip so hard, I tasted blood. The rule was all I had now, the only barrier between me and whatever had already taken Mason. If I broke it, I'd join him inside those pipes, or worse, become one of the voices urging others to look. A sudden jolt threw me sideways, as a beam snapped under pressure. My helmet smashed against the frame, stars exploding in my vision, but I clung tighter. The vibration surged closer, the rhythm unmistakably human in its pace, hand over hand, like someone climbing right behind me. My stomach knotted, bile rising, but I forced my eyes upward, refusing to give in. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, dozens of voices all speaking at once. Mason, the supervisor, even my own distorted and hollow. Down here they beckoned, as though the entire ocean floor had become a chorus of the drowned. The higher I climbed, the darker it became. The lights above had failed completely, leaving only the thin cone of my helmet lamp to slice through the void. My breathing grew ragged, each inhale a desperate prayer. The regulator hissed in uneven bursts, and for the first time, I realized my oxygen was running dangerously low. Panic clawed up my throat. If I didn't surface soon, the rule wouldn't matter, but if I broke it now, I'd never make it anyway. I pressed forward, muscles screaming, as the invisible steps beneath me grew closer, the rhythm now in perfect sync with mine. Then I felt it. Fingers, or something like fingers, brushed against the heel of my boot. The touch was faint but undeniable, a caress more than a grab, like whatever was behind me wanted to savor the moment. My lungs seized, and I kicked wildly, my boots scraping against metal. The whispers roared, louder than the blood, pounding in my ears, but I didn't look. I couldn't. My jaw trembled, my teeth grinding as I focused only on the frame above. The temptation was a living thing, clawing at my mind with every beat of silence. Another beam cracked below, the sound traveling up through the rig like a death knell. I imagined the entire structure collapsing, dragging me down into the abyss with whatever shadow climbed behind me. My knife slipped from its sheath, clanging softly against the beam before tumbling into the void. For an instant, I almost looked to follow it, to see where it landed. My whole body twitched toward the abyss, but I squeezed my eyes shut, tears mixing with the condensation on the glass. I wouldn't give in. Not yet. At last, a faint shimmer broke the endless black above me. The surface. The thought sent a surge of desperate strength through my arms, and I pulled harder, every movement a battle against exhaustion. The shimmer grew brighter, fractured by waves, promising air and light and distance from the nightmare below. My chest tightened with relief, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew frantic, shrieking, furious, as though realizing their prey was escaping. The vibrations shook the rig like an earthquake, and I felt more fingers brushing my leg, tugging just hard enough to remind me how close they were. I lunged upward, breaking free from the last beam, and kicked hard toward the surface. The shimmer expanded, swallowing my vision, promising salvation. The whispers reached a fever pitch, every voice screaming at once, but I refused to look. My muscles burned, my vision blurred, but I forced myself onward, closer and closer. Just as my hand broke the waterline, something seized my ankle with crushing strength, jerking me downward with impossible force. My head slammed back under, bubbles erupting from my mask, and in that split second of panic, my eyes darted down. The moment my eyes darted down, I understood why Rule 5, "None of us dive alone twice," was carved into every diver's memory, like scripture. What I saw wasn't the abyss, not the endless black void I had expected, but a reflection of myself staring back, my face pressed against a shifting wall of water, distorted and hollow-eyed, its mouth opening in a silent scream that matched the panic clawing at my chest. But it wasn't just me. Behind that warped reflection floated Mason, and others too, faces of men and women I didn't recognize, all fused together in a grotesque procession, drifting upward like corpses tied to a single rope. The hand on my ankle tightened, jerking me violently downward, and I screamed into the regulator, the sound muffled into bubbles that rushed past my face. My reflection moved with me, its eyes widening in perfect sync, its mouth twisting into something closer to a grin than a scream. Mason's face slid across the watery mirror, merging with mine, as though he were trying to climb inside me. My lungs seized in panic, and I thrashed, clawing at the unseen grip around my ankle. But the harder I fought, the deeper the sea seemed to pull me. I forced myself to stop struggling, remembering how panic burned through oxygen faster than anything. My mind replayed the supervisor's words. "None of us dive alone twice. If you come back from the deep once, don't think you'll come back again. Something follows you." I had thought it was superstition, a way of scaring rookies into caution. But as the faces swirled below, I realized it wasn't about fear, it was about inevitability. If you survived the first dive, you carried something back with you, something that waited for the chance to take you the second time. My chest heaved as the grip dragged me lower, away from the faint shimmer of the surface. The reflection shifted, warping into a tunnel of faces that spiraled downward, each one stretched thin against the water, as though pressed against invisible glass. Mason's lips moved again, forming words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "You shouldn't have come back." The phrase repeated silently in the mouths of the others, a chorus of drowned souls, reminding me that this dive had been my mistake. And now it wasn't just Mason they wanted, it was me. I slashed at my ankle with my knife, the blade slicing through nothing but water. Whatever held me wasn't physical, at least not in the way I understood. The pull wasn't a hand or a rope, it was a claim, like the ocean itself had decided I belonged to it now. My chest burned, each breath a jagged scrape of panic through the regulator. I couldn't break free by force, I had to find another way. The rule whispered in my head, relentless. None of us dive alone twice. The second dive was always the last, unless I could make it someone else's. The thought turned my stomach, but survival has a way of reshaping morality. If something followed every diver who returned, then maybe it wasn't bound to me alone. Maybe it could be passed on, like a curse. I clawed at the water, twisting upward, dragging the weight of the thing clinging to me. The shimmer of the surface still lingered faintly above, though it seemed farther now, unreachable. I kicked harder, using every ounce of strength left, even as the faces in the reflection contorted into snarls of rage. They didn't want me to escape. They wanted me to join them. The pressure in my head spiked, vision narrowing into a tunnel as my oxygen dwindled. My lamp flickered, sputtering as though even the light was suffocating. The whispers returned, clear this time. Mason's voice louder than the rest. Breathe deep, let it in. It's easier that way. My throat convulsed, and for a horrifying moment I nearly obeyed, ready to flood my lungs with salt water, just to make the pain stop. But then I saw it, the rig's emergency beacon, a faint red glow pulsing weakly above, tethered to the framework like a lifeline. I surged toward it, dragging the unseen weight with me, my body screaming in protest. The grip on my ankle grew frantic, pulling, tearing, desperate to stop me, but I forced myself higher, clawing at the water like it was solid. The faces below stretched farther, their mouths gaping impossibly wide, and Mason's warped grin filled the reflection once more. He mouthed a final phrase I refused to acknowledge, because if I read it, if I understood it, I knew I wouldn't keep climbing. The beacon's light grew brighter, casting a red glow across my mask. My fingers brushed the rigging around it, and I clung to it like salvation. The pull on my ankle didn't stop, but for the first time it faltered, as though the thing holding me back wasn't strong enough to fight both gravity and willpower. I kicked harder, tearing free for a split second before the tendrils lashed again. Pain shot up my leg as the grip clamped down tighter than ever, and I screamed, bubbles tearing from my mouth in a frantic stream. Then the beacon flared, brighter than it should have been, searing through the water like blood-red lightning. The reflection below shattered, faces rippling and dissolving into the black. The grip on my ankle loosened, unraveling like smoke. I didn't wait to question it. I surged upward, lungs on fire, until at last I broke the surface with an explosive gasp. Cold night air rushed into my chest, sharper than any breath I'd ever taken, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. But as I drifted there, clinging to the buoy line, a terrible realization sank into me. The reflection was gone, yes, the grip had loosened, but the rule wasn't wrong. None of us dive alone twice. I had survived the second dive, but only because the thing below had let me go, and that meant it hadn't given up. It was waiting, it was patient, and next time, no matter what I did, I wouldn't come back. And then just beneath the surface, a face broke the water, Mason's smiling, as if he'd been waiting for me all along. Mason's face broke the water, rippling with that grotesque smile, and I froze, every muscle locking in place. His lips parted, and through the slosh of waves, I heard my name drift upward, soft but unmistakable. That was when I remembered Rule 6. Never speak if someone calls your name from below. The supervisors had been clear. If you answered, you weren't answering Mason, or whoever you thought you knew. You were answering the ocean itself, and once it heard you, it wouldn't let you go. The sound of my name twisted around me, low and syrup thick, carried through the water and the air at once. My teeth chattered uncontrollably, though not from cold. Mason's head bobbed, just a few feet away, eyes glassy but locked on mine, his mouth moving like it was shaping words just for me. My instinct screamed to respond, to plead, to curse, to do anything but stay silent. Yet the rule clamped down on my tongue like a vice, the only shield I had between myself and whatever wore Mason's face. I kicked backward, putting distance between us, the waves slapping against my mask. Mason's face followed without swimming, gliding forward as though dragged on invisible strings. His jaw unhinged slightly wider than it should have, the edges of his smile tearing into something less human. My name oozed from him again, louder this time, echoing across the surface like it was being spoken through the entire sea. My throat burned from the effort of silence, but I bit down hard enough to taste blood, forcing myself to breathe through my regulator instead of answering. The beacon beside me pulsed its faint red glow, and for a heartbeat I thought it might drive him back. Instead, the light flickered, as though Mason's presence was draining it. His head tilted, water pouring from his mouth, and then his voice rose again. This time in the cadence of the supervisor I'd heard on comms earlier. Report, status. The words were perfect, calm, commanding, but the mouth that spoke them was stretched too wide, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deeper than lungs. It was the ocean mimicking voices, trying every mask it had to make me speak. I shut my eyes, gripping the buoy line, until my knuckles went white inside the gloves. The salt stung at my cut lip, and my chest ached with the effort of keeping quiet. Silence was safety, silence was survival, but Mason didn't stop. His voice fractured into two, then three, then dozens, every drowned reflection from below rising in chorus. They all said my name, one after another, until it became a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. My head spun with the pressure of it, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might scream just to drown out the noise. Instead, I ducked under the surface, shoving myself downward to escape the voices. The water muffled them but didn't erase them, and as I descended, I saw them again, the faces in the pipes, stretched thin against invisible walls. They mouthed my name in silence, their eyes rolling back, mouths twitching wider and wider, until they split across their cheeks. My stomach lurched, bile burning the back of my throat. I shot back upward, breaking the surface again with a gasp, only to find Mason's face closer than before, his jaw unhinged nearly to his chest. The beacon sputtered and died, plunging me into near-total darkness. Panic clawed at my ribs, but the rule thundered in my skull. Never speak if someone calls your name from below. I clung to that line like it was the only thing tethering me to life. My legs kicked wildly, propelling me toward the faint shadow of the rig, though every stroke felt heavier, like the water had thickened into tar. Mason's face bobbed after me, grinning, his voice unraveling into a guttural growl that still somehow shaped my name. I reached the rig's ladder and grabbed hold, hauling myself upward, one rung at a time. The metal was slick with algae, each step threatening to slip me back into the black. Mason's voice didn't follow me out of the water, it seeped through it instead, vibrating through the ladder itself, until the steel in my hands thrummed with the sound of my own name. My vision blurred, my ears rang, and still I bit down on silence, jaw trembling from the effort. The voices wanted acknowledgement, and I refused to give it. Halfway up the ladder, I risked a glance toward the sea. Mason was gone, his face vanished without a ripple. For a moment, I thought I'd resisted long enough to survive. Relief washed through me, heavy and fragile, and I sagged against the rung, my breath fogging the glass of my helmet. Then beneath the surface, a dozen new faces appeared at once, each one staring up at me with unblinking eyes. Their mouths opened in unison, and through the steel and water and air, they spoke again, this time not my name, but a single word, answer. As I clung to the slick ladder, the drowned chorus whispered that single command, answer, through the metal itself, vibrating against my bones. I didn't reply, and the silence cut deeper than any words could. That was when another memory surfaced, colder than the water dripping from my gear. Rule 7. Never look directly into the water after midnight. The supervisors hadn't just called it superstition. They'd said the sea didn't reflect at night. It stared back. I realized then, with a jolt, that midnight had already passed. My first mistake was tilting my head to confirm. The surface below me had stopped moving. The waves froze as if time had been snatched from them, forming a slick sheet of glass. My reflection stared up at me, but it wasn't me. Not exactly. Its helmet had cracked, spiderweb fractures crawling across the glass, and where my eyes should have been, the socket swam with pale, writhing shapes. I snapped my gaze away instantly, clenching my teeth until my jaw ached, praying that brief glance hadn't counted. But the sea is greedy. Even a moment of attention was enough. I felt it the way a fish must feel a hook sink deep into its gill. My stomach dropped as a pressure coiled around my ankles, invisible but heavy, tugging me downward with a patient certainty. The drowned faces that had demanded my answer dissolved back into the still surface, replaced by a perfect reflection of myself, climbing the ladder a half step slower. My double's movements echoed mine, but each lagging beat made it clearer. It wasn't following, it was pulling. I forced my arms higher, dragging my body upward with frantic jerks, my boots clanging against the ladder. The reflection below matched the rhythm, climbing closer though its movements dragged like it carried chains. My gloves slipped, and for a terrifying second, I nearly fell back into its reach. The rig above loomed closer, but not fast enough. I didn't dare look again, but the reflection's presence pressed against the back of my eyes, urging me to glance down and confirm it was still there. That was the real trap, the gaze it demanded in return. The comm unit in my helmet crackled to life then, startling me so hard I almost lost my grip. A voice hissed through, soft, coaxing, too familiar. It was my own voice, repeating in rhythm with my gasping breaths. Look, look, each word lengthened, drawing out the vowels until they scraped like rust. I jammed the side of my helmet against the rung, trying to silence the feed, but the echo seeped deeper, reverberating inside my skull like it had bypassed the electronics completely. The sea wasn't calling anymore, it was convincing. I dragged myself higher, the ladder groaning with each frantic pull, until the deck's edge finally crept within reach. My fingers shook as I hauled my body over the lip, crashing onto the metal surface with a weighty thud. For a moment, relief poured through me like oxygen after a blackout. I was out of the water. I was safe. Then the steel beneath my cheek grew slick, as though seawater was spreading across the deck itself. I lifted my head, and the reflection was waiting, not below but smeared across the wet metal like a mirror stretched flat. It was me again, but no longer lagging. This version grinned wide, teeth too sharp, lips torn at the corners. I scrambled backward, boots skidding on the slick floor, and the reflection followed, rippling toward me as if the puddle was alive. My heart thundered so loud it drowned out the hum of the rig's generators. The rule repeated in my mind, a final warning I clung to with every breath: never look directly into the water after midnight. The problem was, I had already looked. The reflection lunged upward then, breaking the surface of the puddle with a spray that smelled like copper and brine. Its arms clawed toward me, wet and angular, joints bending in directions mine never could. I threw myself sideways, colliding with a crate hard enough to bruise my ribs. The thing splashed onto the steel where I had been, shuddering violently, skin peeling away in ribbons that steamed under the cold night air. It howled without sound, its gaping mouth shaping my name over and over again. The only thing I could do was crawl backward, eyes squeezed shut until the splashing stilled. When I opened my eyes again, the puddle was gone, the deck dry as if nothing had happened. My lungs still labored, my hands trembled, but the reflection was nowhere in sight. I didn't trust it. I couldn't trust anything the sea showed me anymore. My gaze darted toward the water's edge of the rig, black and bottomless under the thin wash of moonlight. I knew better than to glance directly at it again, but every nerve screamed at me to check, to see if the reflection had returned. That was the cruelest part of the rule. It wasn't about surviving once. It was about resisting forever. And then I heard it again. The faint clang of metal, the slosh of water, the echo of climbing. Not from below this time, but from inside the rig. Something had made it onto the structure with me. The sound of those footsteps clanged against the hollow steel, slow and deliberate, echoing up from the catwalk just beneath me. I froze, pressing my back against the crate, my breath rasping too loud inside my helmet. That's when another line from orientation seared back into memory. Rule 8. If you hear footsteps on the rig at night, hide until they pass. They hadn't said why. They didn't need to. The look in the supervisor's eyes when he repeated it had been enough. I ducked low and slipped between the stacked containers, wedging myself into the narrow dark where the rig lights barely reached. The air smelled of rust and stale seawater, and the hum of machinery beneath the deck masked some of my movement. The footsteps, however, didn't falter. They grew sharper, clearer, climbing the stairs one at a time with a patience that chilled me more than any sprint could have. Whoever it was knew I was here, but the rule hammered in my head: don't move, don't look, don't break the silence. Just hide. Through the narrow gap in the containers, I caught a glimpse of a shadow stretching long under the fluorescent lamps. It didn't match human proportions. The legs bent too far backward, the torso hunched too low, and yet the weight of its steps struck the deck with the heaviness of boots. The sound was calculated, rehearsed, like someone imitating the rhythm of human footsteps rather than walking naturally. My teeth sank into my lip again, desperate to keep from gasping as the figure paused directly above me, the steel groaning under its weight. The air shifted, and with it came a low rasp, not quite breathing, not quite wind. It lingered, hovering as if the thing were listening for me. My pulse throbbed so loud I swore it would give me away. Slowly the shadow stretched further, sliding down the wall of the container until it reached the very edge of my hiding place. I bit down harder, my jaw trembling, and counted silently in my head, praying it would pass. The rule promised safety only if I waited. It didn't promise how long. Then, just as suddenly as it had come, the footsteps continued. Each metallic clang grew softer, fainter, until they faded into the far end of the rig. I exhaled in shaky bursts, my hands trembling against the corrugated steel. Relief swelled inside me, but it came too fast, too soon. Because the echo of those steps didn't vanish completely, they split. One set faded into the distance, but another stayed close, circling the containers like a predator testing a cage. My stomach lurched as realization hit. The sound wasn't footsteps at all. It was the ocean mimicking footsteps, waiting for me to break cover. I pressed myself flatter against the cold steel, fighting the instinct to run. The false steps prowled slowly around me, circling twice before halting inches from where I crouched. Silence draped over the rig, thick and suffocating. I dared a glance through the gap, and what I saw made my chest seize. There was nothing, no shadow, no figure, no disturbance of the air, just the sound of boots scraping steel right outside my hiding place. The ocean had learned to walk, and it wanted me to know. A drop of salt water splashed onto my glove from above. My gaze flicked upward, and the ceiling above me rippled like the underside of the surface, shifting as if the sea itself was pressing through. Another drop hit, then another, and soon a steady drip rained down, staining the deck around me with spreading wet footprints. My throat constricted, but I clamped down on silence, curling tighter into the shadows. The footsteps grew louder now, overlapping, dozens of them marching across the rig, though I saw no one. The entire deck seemed alive with echoes of boots. I couldn't take it anymore. My lungs burned, my knees ached from crouching, but I didn't dare step into that storm of false footsteps. The rule was clear: hide until they pass. The question was, what if they never did? My vision swam, black spots blooming as panic clawed at my ribs. I pressed my helmet against the steel, closing my eyes, and counted again. 10, 20, 30. Somewhere between 40 and 50, the noise softened. One by one, the footsteps faded into silence, until only the thrum of the rig's generators remained. I waited longer still, afraid it was a trick. Finally, when the silence stretched long enough to strangle me, I eased out from between the containers. The deck was empty. Dry. As if nothing had ever passed. My knees trembled as I staggered upright, the taste of blood thick on my tongue from biting down so hard. For one fragile moment, I believed I had outlasted it, but then the radio on my chest crackled to life, and a voice whispered through, quiet as a breath. "You shouldn't have looked up." The voice on my radio slithered into my ears, low and urgent, carrying words that twisted into my own thoughts. "You shouldn't have looked up." My pulse hammered as I fumbled for the switch, but even before I touched it, I remembered Rule 9. Never trust the voices on the radio after dark. The supervisors had warned us that the ocean could mimic sound, crawling into frequencies like mold seeping through walls. Radios weren't lifelines after sunset. They were lures. I ripped the unit from my chest and slammed it against the crate, but the voice persisted, humming through the metal like it had bypassed the circuitry. "Too late now," it whispered. And though the words were sharp, the tone was familiar, too familiar. It was my mother's voice, distorted by static, rising from memories I hadn't thought about in years. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The sea wasn't just stealing the voices of those who'd drowned. It was stealing mine too, burrowing into places no water should ever reach. The radio crackled again, shifting mid-sentence. "Status report," the new voice commanded, clipped and cold, the exact cadence of the supervisor. I froze, torn between the instinct to reply and the memory of Mason's face mimicking those same words. My hand hovered over the switch, trembling. One answer would bind me to whatever waited in the static. But silence was unbearable too, the weight of their words pressing against my skull like the pressure of the deep. The radio knew I was listening, and that was enough. I stumbled toward the rig's control station, the only place where the comm lines were hardwired. My boots rang against the steel, and with every step, the voices shifted behind me. My name repeated in Mason's cadence, laughter bubbling in tones I recognized as my own, sobbing that clawed deep into my chest with the sound of my sister's cry. Each voice begged me to respond, some promising rescue, others warning of dangers I couldn't see. But the rule was a tether, and I held fast to it. Silence was survival. Inside the control room, the monitors flickered with static, lines of interference crawling across the screens. I yanked the main radio offline, disconnecting it completely, but the static didn't fade. It grew louder, filling the room until it buzzed through my helmet like a swarm of insects. I clenched my fists and shut my eyes, but then a single word sliced through it all, sharp and clear. "Down." My eyes flew open, my stomach twisting with dread. The ocean wasn't content with speaking. It was giving orders now. I staggered back, knocking into the console, and the monitors bled with images that weren't supposed to be there. Grainy black and white feeds showed the rig's catwalks, empty under the thin light. Then movement, a figure, hunched and slow, dragging itself across the deck. Its face was blurred, but the rhythm of its steps matched the false footsteps I had just endured. My throat tightened, the urge to scream rising, but I swallowed it down, forcing my body into stillness. The voices wanted acknowledgement, and I refused to give it. The screen flickered again, this time revealing the dive platform at the rig's edge. Another figure stood there, soaked and smiling, head tilted just enough for me to recognize the outline. Mason. His mouth moved soundlessly, but my radio hissed his words in real time. "Come back down. We're waiting." My hands shook as I yanked the emergency power, plunging the control room into darkness. The hum of the monitors ceased, but the static lingered in the air, a phantom sound that clung to me like salt. I pressed against the wall, breathing shallowly, the dark pressing in on every side. The radio's hushed voices shifted again, now whispering lullabies from my childhood, words my mother used to sing before sleep. For a moment my chest ached with longing, the weight of memory softening the edges of my fear. But then the tune cracked midway, dropping into a guttural rasp that wasn't human at all. My stomach turned to ice, and I realized the ocean wasn't just mimicking, it was learning how to use me against myself. I ripped my helmet off and hurled it across the room. The radio, still clipped to the side, hissed one last word before shattering against the console. Closer. The silence that followed was worse than the static. I stood there trembling, staring at the ruined equipment, when I heard something else, not through the speakers, not through wires, but directly inside the control room itself. A wet inhale, shallow and steady, coming from the corner where the shadows pooled. The ocean didn't need the radio anymore. The inhale from the corner thickened the darkness. Wet and ragged, each breath pulling the air out of the room. My knees locked as I tried to make sense of it. But before I could move, the floor beneath me gleamed. A spreading patch of liquid seeped between the steel plates, darker than oil, glistening as though it absorbed light rather than reflected it. The warning slammed back into my head with paralyzing clarity. Rule 10. Never touch the black water that seeps onto the rig. It wasn't a leak, and it wasn't natural. It was the ocean pushing in where it didn't belong. The puddle widened in silence, creeping closer to my boots. Its edges rippled with a pulse that matched the rhythm of my heart, as though it could sense me. I stumbled backward, but the room was too small, the walls too close. My heel brushed against a chair, and it toppled into the spreading pool with a dull splash. The chair's metal frame hissed and dissolved like sugar in boiling water, collapsing into nothing within seconds. The smell of salt and rot bloomed into the air, thick enough to burn my nose. I clutched the edge of the console, forcing my eyes away from the liquid, but it didn't stop growing. The puddle snaked into thin rivulets that branched like veins, splitting across the floor toward me. The breath from the corner deepened, rattling in rhythm with the water's advance. The two were connected. I realized whatever was hiding in the shadows, the water was its tether. If the liquid touched me, it wouldn't just burn me away like the chair, it would pull me through. Desperation clawed at me, and I lunged for the emergency ladder that led to the deck above. The metal rungs were slick with condensation, but my grip held as I hauled myself upward. Below me the black water surged, lapping at the bottom rung like it knew I was escaping. The shadows writhed, and the ragged breath turned into a low hiss, animalistic and furious. I climbed faster, every muscle screaming, until I burst through the hatch into the open air, gasping as though I'd broken the surface of the sea itself. The night was eerily calm. The generators hummed, the floodlights buzzed faintly, but the deck stretched empty in every direction. For a moment I thought I had left it behind. Then I saw it, thin lines of black seeping between the bolts of the steel, spreading across the deck in crawling webs. The puddles were everywhere, small at first, then swelling as though fed from below. Each one quivered in time with that same dreadful breathing. The ocean wasn't content with the depths anymore. It was rising to claim the rig. I ran, my boots pounded against the steel, the air filling with the stench of rot as more puddles opened in my path. Some spread wide, forcing me to leap over them. Others seeped in trickles that chased after me like snakes. Every instinct screamed to look down, to watch where I stepped, but I knew better than to focus on the water itself. The rule was clear. Don't touch it. Don't let it touch you. The only way to survive was to keep moving, even if it meant sprinting blind. My lungs burned as I reached the crew quarters, slamming the heavy door shut behind me. The metal groaned, but it held. For a few precious seconds, silence returned. My pulse slowed, my breath steadied, and I dared to hope that the water couldn't breach this far. But then a sound broke the stillness. Not the wet hiss I'd come to dread, but a voice. Low, trembling, familiar. Help me. My blood ran cold. It was Mason's voice, muffled, as if carried through the walls themselves. I pressed my ear to the bulkhead, and the voice came clearer. It's burning me. Please. My fists clenched as I fought the urge to believe him. Mason was gone. He had been gone since the false light took him. But the ocean was clever, and it knew exactly which voices to use. I staggered back, shaking my head, whispering to myself, "It's not him, it's not him." Yet the pleading grew louder, more desperate, until it was all I could hear. "Just a hand, please pull me out." I turned and my stomach dropped. Black water seeped from beneath the crew quarters door, curling into the room like a hand reaching for me. It pulsed with every syllable of Mason's plea, the liquid forming shapes that mimicked fingers clawing at the floor. My breath hitched. An instinct screamed to step forward, to reach out and help. But the rule slammed into my skull again, louder than the voices. "Never touch the black water that seeps onto the rig." I stumbled backward, pressing against the far wall, shaking uncontrollably. The water stopped inches from my boots, trembling in place as though waiting for me to break. Then slowly, it began to rise, lifting off the ground in a thin column. The surface shimmered, folding and shaping until a face emerged at the top. Mason's again, twisted with agony, his skin melting into rivulets that dripped back into the pool. His mouth opened, and instead of words, the same wet inhale poured out, rattling the air. The black water wasn't mimicking him anymore. It was wearing him like a mask. I clutched the emergency flare from the wall and yanked it to life. The red blaze filled the room with violent light, and the black water shrieked, not with sound, but with a vibration that shook my bones. Mason's false face dissolved, splattering across the floor as the column collapsed into a steaming puddle. I hurled the flare onto it, and the liquid recoiled, retreating beneath the door like smoke sucked through a vent. The room fell still again, though the smell of rot clung thick in the air. I sagged against the wall, my chest heaving, sweat soaking through my suit. For the first time, I realized just how fragile the rig was, how thin the steel beneath me had become. The ocean wasn't waiting for us to dive anymore. It was breaching upward, testing the structure, seeping through every crack. The rules weren't just about surviving the depths, they were about surviving the invasion. And then I heard it, the creak of the deck above me, slow and deliberate, as if something heavy had finally climbed aboard. The weight above me shifted, steel groaning, as though the rig itself sagged beneath the burden. My pulse rattled in my ears, and for one breathless moment, I thought the structure might collapse outright. But then another memory cut through the panic, sharp as the bite of cold salt water. Rule 11. When the ocean climbs aboard, never let it see your fear. The supervisors had spoken it like a curse, eyes hollow, as if they were remembering something none of them had truly escaped. I didn't understand what it meant then. Now, I had no choice but to learn. The deck thundered again, each step heavier than the last, until dust sifted down from the ceiling panels above me. Whatever had come aboard wasn't imitating footsteps this time. It carried its own weight. The air thickened with humidity, salty and metallic, coating my tongue until it tasted like blood. I swallowed hard, pressing my back against the wall, but every trembling muscle betrayed me. Fear was pouring off me like heat, and if the rule was true, it was already too late. The overhead hatch creaked open, and a shadow spilled across the crew quarters. It wasn't shaped like a man, or even like the twisted figures I had seen in reflections. It spread wide, dripping, its edges blurring like liquid stretched into form. Then it began to drip through the hatch, heavy streams of water slapping against the floor and rising upward, shaping itself into something vaguely human. I clenched my fists to stop them shaking, biting my tongue until copper filled my mouth. If fear fed it, I couldn't give it that fuel. It stood before me now, a towering silhouette of water blacker than night, limbs quivering as if half-formed. Faces floated across its surface, dozens of them, all half-recognizable, all drowning mid-scream. Mason was there, the supervisor was there, and worse, faces I knew it couldn't possibly have. My mother's, my sister's, even my own. Each one shifted in and out of the watery mass, mouths opening silently, eyes fixed on me. The thing leaned closer, its tide-churned breath rattling through the room, searching for the panic it craved. My heart raced out of control, each beat threatening to burst my chest. But I forced my breathing steady, inhaling through my nose, exhaling slowly, like the supervisors had drilled us before each dive. I imagined the fear burning off me in waves, leaving nothing but cold stone behind. My legs trembled despite myself, so I bent down as if to tighten my boots, disguising it as deliberate movement. The ocean was watching, but it couldn't know what was real unless I showed it. I had to wear my own mask. The creature tilted its head, and a dozen mouths opened at once. This time it did speak, not through radios, not through shadows, but directly into the air. The sound was wrong, like a chorus recorded backward, yet the words were unmistakable. "We smell you." My throat convulsed, begging to swallow, to scream, to do anything but stand still. Instead, I straightened, met the blur where its eyes might have been, and said nothing. The silence was heavier than any scream could have been. The black water shuddered, as though confused, then advanced another step. The puddles around its feet stretched toward me, fingers of liquid clawing across the floor. I forced my body into motion, walking sideways along the wall, never turning my back, never breaking the illusion of calm. Each step was a battle against instinct, every nerve screaming to run, but the rule was iron in my mind. When the ocean climbs aboard, never let it see your fear. If it saw me panic, it would finish what it started. I edged toward the emergency ladder again, hands steady on the rungs though sweat slicked my palms. The creature followed, not quickly, not slowly, just enough to let me know it had no need to rush. It was patient, ancient, and endless. My boots rang against the steel as I climbed, and the sound nearly gave me away, sharp, frantic, betraying my effort to escape. But I swallowed the fear down, pressing it deeper until it sat like a stone in my stomach. My face, my posture, everything I showed it, had to remain steady. I reached the top deck, the cold night air slicing against my skin. For one fragile moment, I thought the creature had stayed below. Then the hatch behind me erupted, black water spilling upward in a geyser, reforming into its towering shape under the floodlights. It loomed higher than before, faces writhing faster, voices hissing just beyond comprehension. The rig groaned under its weight, the steel bending, bolts snapping one by one. My knees nearly buckled, but I forced myself upright, staring into its shifting surface with every ounce of false calm I could muster. The thing leaned close, inches from my face, its surface boiling with whispers. I could see myself reflected 100 times in its rippling form, each version of me more twisted, more terrified. One leaned forward, mouth opening in a silent scream, eyes pleading with me to give in. I clenched my jaw, steadying my breathing, refusing to move. The silence stretched long enough to crush me, until finally, the creature shuddered. It reared back, not retreating, but waiting, testing. The rules had kept me alive this long, but I knew with bone-deep certainty, they weren't meant to save us forever. They were only meant to delay. The ocean doesn't forgive, the ocean doesn't forget. And as the black water surged higher, rising to engulf the rig, I realized it had already seen through me. It knew my fear. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.